Metal Gear Solid 5 remains a difficult game to analyze, largely because I can't even tell you if the game's finished or not. But while there's definite lore issues and plot holes in the game, none of that matters. I just don't care at all. Whether the game's finished or not, we nonetheless are presented with a very strong message regarding language and colonization. The game's director, Hideo Kojima, is explicit in this as he has the game's villain, Skullface, explain his origins to our hero, Punished Venom Snake. Look guys, I never said Hideo Kojima was subtle and okay, just hear him out.
I was still a child when we were raided by soldiers. Foreign soldiers. Torn from my elders, I was made to speak their language. With each new post, my masters changed, along with the words they made me speak. Words are peculiar. With each change, I changed too. My thoughts, personality, how I saw right and wrong. War changed me, and not only my visage. Words can kill. I was invaded by words, burrowing and breeding inside me. A philosopher once said, "It is no nation we inhabit, but a language."
What Ghostface is discussing isn't something new. It's the foundations of postcolonial studies perspective of linguistics. Robert Dale Baker, in his book How to Interpret Literature, defines postcolonial studies as the study of colonialism, postcolonialism, and more broadly, cultural and political relations between more powerful and less powerful groups of people. Language is the foundation of how we perceive the world. It's how we interact with people. It's how we learn and form social bonds. The dominance of one language over another is not just a choice of preference. It's a matter of choosing one language's history, cultural origins, aversions, and preferences, and deciding that those are going to be what's allowed to skew the conversation. Kenyan novelist and postcolonial studies writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o states, language, any language, has a dual character. It is both a means of communication and a carrier of culture. Indeed, the words we hear and use affect our perspectives and our interactions with others on a massive scale. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain. Now, I'm going to be glaringly clear with y'all. I ain't trying to protect you guys from spoilers. The game came out in 2015, and I'm also not trying to deep dive into every single facet of one of my most beloved franchises because it's so convoluted and obnoxious. So if you hear me paraphrase a relevant plot point too much for your liking, leave a comment and I'll pretend to care. Cause it gets me engagement, man. I'll pretend. I'll pretend real good. Just give me my engagement, yo. In Phantom Pain, you get to play as Venom Snake, an unwitting kind of clone of the series mainstay, sometimes bad guy Big Boss. No, that's his name, Big Boss. And you're not really a clone, there's actual clones. You're somebody who's been brainwashed into thinking you're him. Obnoxious, I told you. I told y'all. Don't act surprised. I told you guys what this was gonna be. Skullface, who you met at the beginning of this video, was a child victim of colonization. Skullface was born in a small village in northern Transylvania, which was restored to Hungarian rule in World War II. He states that constant regime shifts during his life, including Nazi occupation during World War II and Soviet occupation during the Cold War, stripped him of his cultural identity. Further, his deformities mostly stem from the region being bombed, due to occupying forces having converted the local factory into a weapons manufacturing site. Skullface eventually became an agent of the Soviets, where his natural skills and cultivated cruelty allowed him to rise through the ranks, perpetrating major acts of cruelty as an information officer. Having no true identity of his own after a childhood drifting at whims of occupying forces, Skullface became a chameleon of sorts. Eventually, he came across a DNA scientist going by the name Code Talker, a man who hated the English language from traumatic experiences at boarding school and from seeing the U.S. Marines mutilate the Navajo or Diné language into a cipher to be used for war. So, Code Talker's not inherently a bad guy, but he is incredibly intelligent, and he finds these parasites that he believes gave humans their ability to speak, and I guess that's like the canon in Metal Gear Solid. It's weird. I told you guys it's a weird series. Because Skullface is a bad dude, he decides, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you like made it so these parasites could fatally attack people based on language? Kotaker ends up creating a parasite strain that is spread by speaking a specific language that the parasites are attuned to. And these parasites go lethal when the new host speaks the language. In other words, it's ethnic cleansing and genocide being perpetuated through language as its primary vector. It's pretty messed up. To quote Milan Kundera, the first step in liquidating people is to erase its memory, destroy its books, its culture, its history. And that's exactly what this parasite does. It intends on wiping out culture. Skullface's whole plan is to target the American people and culture through targeting their language. He sees English as the lingua franca, or rather a language that through violence and colonialism has become the dominant unifying language. Look, it's no secret that English is a bastardized language. It has elements of French, Latin, Germanic languages, and countless others. It's not entirely clear where Skullface's parasites draw the line between languages, but the goal is apparently the removal of the English language as a dominant international tongue. As the story develops, the player encounters many strains of the parasite that are conditioned to target a multitude of languages. A major plot point occurs when the parasites infiltrate Mother Base, and many of the soldiers whom you've been recruiting begin to be infected. At first, the player is unaware of what's causing these infections, but either by careful analysis or having lost a whole bunch of your people, eventually getting to the next big plot reveal, Venom Snake discovers that the parasite has been spreading because the soldiers have been sharing language with one another. The game has a progression system built in where recruited soldiers can pick up traits from people who they are assigned with. And unfortunately, that means as the characters from different backgrounds and nationalities have been working together, they've also been infecting one another with the parasites. In other words, the more diverse your group becomes, the more embracing of different cultures they become, the more they are being attacked by colonialism, the more they are being oppressed by this phantom pain of colonialism. Does that work? No, it doesn't work, but we're going with it anyway. We're keeping that in the script. Thanks to Code Talker, Venom Snake can curtail the infection several times, and eventually the parasite is largely prevented from spreading. That is, until the parasite is reactivated. The parasite begins to grow out of control on Mother Base, and Venom Snake is left with no other option but to kill all his infected men and prevent them from spreading the parasite to the outside world. It's a brutal scene that hits Venom Snake and the player, who has, up to this point, recruited all of these members, named members, themselves. Note that Skullface can inarguably be referred to as a victim of colonialism. But I want to be clear that this isn't a case of bad guy did nothing wrong. Because I've seen some online commentaries stating that his actions, which include some of the most objectively reprehensible acts of villainy imaginable, are justified. Which is just like crazy. It's insane, right? Like, that's wild. Because they're not. Martensian psychiatrist Frantz Fanon's writing in Wretched of the Earth posed that native people believing and internalizing a colonizer's racist sense of native people's inferiority allow formerly colonized people, led by Europeanized native intellectuals, corrupt capitalists, and dictators, to sustain the exploitation of colonialism through a self-colonizing neocolonialism. In other words, Skullface is neocolonialism, and neocolonialism is basically when a group has been subjugated for such a long time that they begin to internalize this self-hate and begin to perpetuate it against one another. To put that simply, colonialism often turns the subjugated into future subjugators. It's why Fanon and many other writers state that colonialism cannot be fought from within the colonizer system, and why colonialism, a violent act, must be met with violence. The issue is Skullface is a character who mimics the acts of the colonizer, but who, without a clear identity of his own or a true connection to his people, is only mimicking the violence and ideologies which victimized him. A point made by Homi K. Baba, who noted that the colonized often mimic the colonizer's language, educational system, governmental systems, and in this case, acts of violence. If you think that you sympathize with where Skullface is coming from, then you're missing the point. And just stop, go, get some help. Just get some help.
Stop it. Get some help.
Skullface purports himself to be an adversary of imperialism and the machine of colonialism, but none of that is genuine. He's a villain who embodies both things and who has become so detached from his culture and familial ties that we are left only with an imprint of the colonized. Even physically, the only mark of identity left to him is one of violence and imperialism. Skullface is imperialist violence and subjugation. His entire existence is a symbol of neocolonialism, wherein the subjugated become the new oligarchs, perpetuators of colonial ideology. The fact that he weaponizes language both demonstrates this and shows a major flaw in his beliefs. I've already noted that language helps form our beliefs and the way in which we think. Within the game, Kotaku actually discusses the boarding school he was forced to as a child, where they belittled the Navajo or Dini language in favor of English. And this isn't something exclusive to Phantom Pain. This is something that happens in real life. Like, mask off for a moment. This is something that's happened to me. It's something that's happened to my siblings. They were not allowed to speak Spanish in school. They were forced to speak English. And because of that, they began to lose all traces of Spanish, to the point where my siblings can scarcely speak their native language. And this is something that was perpetuated by the American school system not even like a decade ago. Officially, America has no national language, but English dominates our public spaces, politics, educational systems, and discourse, and it has done so for such a long time that targeting the language would also harm the victims of colonialism who, after generations, have begun to claim ownership of the language. See, the thing is, language evolves. It's a living, breathing thing, like a parasite. Language doesn't really just affect our culture and perspectives, we also affect it. We form dialects, we make up words, we change pronunciations, all of us have an effect on language. Especially marginalized or colonized people have an effect on the language that they're using in their regions. We create creoles, or rather a language that simplifies and mixes different languages into a full-fledged new language. And even things like Spanglish blur the line of English and Spanish. What I'm saying is that while language is most certainly a tool of colonialism in a post-colonial world, and let's be clear, it's arguable whether we're in a post-colonial world because we're currently living in a world where there's truly awful things happening and colonization is actively occurring. But for the sake of theory, we're saying post-colonial, and don't hate me for saying that, and I'm not trying to diminish that. But anyway, in a post-colonial world, infusing aspects of one's regional dialect or cultural origins is an act of rebellion against institutional pressures. While the root language may be a tool of the oppressor, our identities exist in the hybrids we create. And it's we're always doing this. It's a human nature thing. Think about your friend groups, think about your family. There's in-jokes, there's vocal memes, and don't start Hideo Kojima memes, please do not. There are specific languages, specific codings that we use with people who we know personally, and we all use language in unique ways. Okay, so I knew I was gonna have to bring this up eventually, and I really wanted to not do that, but here we are. There is one character who I guess sort of reflects the point that languages merge and divert and mix up over time. I'm referring, of course, to Quiet, Kojima's greatest magnum opus. His female character who, after severe burns, has to breathe from her skin. And that's why she doesn't wear clothes. No other reason. Quiet earned her name because of a vow of silence, which she swore due to being a carrier of the English strain of the vocal parasites. Now, Quiet is a main character in Metal Gear Solid, who actually knows a million languages, but she refuses to use these languages because there's a risk of the English vocal parasite mutating inside her. In other words, there's a chance that the connections between languages can train the parasites to latch on to other languages with connections to English and become essentially multilingual killing machines. From a post-colonial perspective, what this means is that Quiet is rendered utterly silent because of her fear of the oppressor. The only language she is able to speak, however, is the Dine language, which she shares with Code Talker, as it lacks a connection to English historically. Now, I suppose I could get into how significant it is that a female character who has lost her voice due to colonial pressure exists, but Kojima says, once you recognize the secret reason for her exposure, you will feel ashamed of your words and deeds. And he says that, but I really don't have the energy or want to pretend that it's anything other than objectifying a female character to the point of removing her voice. Like, there's probably some good meaning with that, but let's be real, Kojima, you just wanted to see her. Moving on. So then, what exactly did Hideo Kojima want to say with his vocal parasites and story littered with victims of war becoming warmongers themselves? I wish I could tell you definitively what Kojima intended, but I honestly can't. My man is a heavy reader, an amazing designer, and he tends to have a good finger on the pulse of politics. But he also loves aesthetic. Skullface is killed and the vocal parasites are destroyed by the end of the game, but I have trouble reconciling the ending. Metal Gear Solid Phantom Pain is a game ultimately about revenge. Both Skullface and Venom Snake are completely driven by revenge. They can both be cruel and have both become more monstrous as they engage in violence. Yet the difference is that Skullface is a monster who aims downward and harms innocents, and he does so by perpetuating the violence of colonialism and domination or outright eradication of people. Whereas Snake, however monstrous as he may become, is a man who gives others a second chance and only acts in extreme violence in the defense of his allies and those who can't defend themselves. What I would like to believe is Kojima's ultimate message is that violence is never something to idealize or take joy in, but that under the threat of extreme violence from an oppressive force, it can still be justified or at the very least understood. What matters in literary criticism is how we interpret a text and what we're able to gain from it. Analyzing it alongside different scholars and different writings and seeing what agreements and connections we're able to make. That's what's important in literary criticism. And playing through this game in 2024, when we're looking at an actual perpetuation of a genocide and extreme violence, that is to say, we are currently observing a political body that is perpetuating genocide and extreme violence overseas, and they're trying to use a threat of violence or self-defense as their claim that their violence is justified. And let's be clear, it's not justified. An escalation of violence to the point of genocide and targeting innocents is never okay. It's never justifiable. Even if there was a reason, even if there was violence that was done against you, it simply cannot be justified. It's immoral and, quite frankly, it's disgusting. And unfortunately, I feel that people are not really grasping what a horrible crime it is that's being perpetuated. There is so much going on overseas, and at the same time, we have fiction that is reflecting these things, and I don't think people are really understanding it. It's just the next big bad thing. And I guess if I want to take away from this video, I want you all to think about the media you consume. I want you to think about what's going on in the world, and I want you to really think about those connections and to think about what our media consumption says about what's going on in the world, how what's going on in the world affects how we view media. Don't just passively watch and be entertained. I mean, be entertained, sure, but really take some time and think about it. I think that's missing more often than it should. Usually at this point, I would plug my Twitch channel, I would plug all my YouTube stuff, but you're here for YouTube. You know, if you want to watch more videos, go for it. I think that we as creators have an obligation to uphold some morality and be role models to the communities that we're a part of. I don't know, just my thoughts. Anyway, I do intend on my next video not being so far off from this one. I am very sorry that I've taken so long, but I hope that this was somewhat informational and that you learned something today. Until next time, happy learning.